Mr. Robert Miller, with his neat, short, combed-back white hair and a face deeply etched with the lines of time, sat in his familiar brown leather armchair. The soft light from the reading lamp illuminated his face, where the deep wrinkles told a long story etched by the years. His eyes, dark, deep-set, and calm, seemed to gaze through the veil of teal towards a distant base where the sound of alarms and the smell of diesel still lingered in his memory. Chapter 1. Life Inside the Wire. People often think that living on a base is safe, that you're sheltered from the sound of guns, from explosions. But that's a half-truth that few tell. Inside the wire, the war was still there. It just took on a different form, a constant simmering tension. Mr. Roberts said, his voice deep and steady, like the familiar hum of a generator. Robert Miller was a young soldier just turning 20 when he set foot in Vietnam in 1968. He was assigned to a large firebase in South Vietnam, a place nicknamed Tent City, because it was made up of hundreds, thousands of military canvas tents, warehouses, and sandbag fortifications. Robert's duty was with a perimeter defense unit, meaning he spent most of his time in watchtowers, checking fences, and maintaining security within the base area. You could smell the base from a distance, Mr. Robert recounted, his eyes slightly closed. The smell of diesel from generators that rumbled day and night. The smell of human waste scorched with JP4 fuel. The dry dust mixed with a faint whiff of gunpowder. That was the olfactory symphony of existence. Life inside the war was a strange dichotomy. On one hand, you had electricity, a mess hall, and could watch movies, even if they were old and stale. On the other hand, you were always in a state of high alert. Barbed wire fences, beeful steel barriers, and high stacks of sandbags seemed safe, but they were thin illusions. The enemy could shell or rocket at any time, from anywhere. Robert remembered long nights on watch. He stood on the wooden watchtower, his eyes fixed on the darkness. Outside the wire was the dense blackness of the jungle, a mysterious world teeming with threats. Inside the wire were the flickering lights from spotlights, the rumbling generators, and the crackle of the radio. He felt like a fish in a net, looking out at a vast, dangerous ocean. We used to joke that inside the wire, you were a bit safer, but outside, you had less to worry about getting hit by a rocket while napping, Mr. Robert chuckled softly, a bitter smile. That's a truth nobody tells you. Dust was a constant companion. In the dry season, red dust flew everywhere, clinging to clothes, rifles, hair, and even between teeth. In the rainy season, the dust turned to slick, sticky mud. Staying clean was impossible. Robert learned to live with the dust, the sweat, and the smell of the earth. The soldiers lived in hot, cramped canvas tents. 6, sometimes 8 men shared a small space. The sounds of snoring, coughing, and turning in sleep became familiar. Privacy was a luxury. However, it was precisely in that confinement that camaraderie was forged. They shared everything, from cigarette packs, chocolate bars, to jokes and fears. Robert often spent time cleaning his rifle or organizing his personal belongings in his backpack. He always kept a yellowed family photo, a letter from his girlfriend, and a Zippo lighter engraved with the American flag. These were small items, but they were his only connection to the world outside the wire, to the normal life he longed to return to. Life inside the wire was a constant waiting, Mr. Roberts said. You waited for your watch to end, waited for the next meal, waited for resupply helicopters, waited for letters from home, and most importantly, waited for the day you'd go home. And in that waiting, fear never completely disappeared. It just lay hidden like a sleeping monster. It was in the hum of the generators, in the flickering light of the spotlights, and in the sudden silences of the night. That was the truth about life inside the wire, a truth no one tells you until you experience it yourself. Chapter 2. The Alarm and Unexpected Nights. Then one day, you hear it. The alarm, not a drill, but the real alarm. The siren that tears through the night, ripping apart all illusions of safety. That's when life inside the wire becomes exactly like life outside. Mr. Roberts said, a slight shudder in his voice, as if the siren still echoed in his ears. For Robert and the other soldiers on the base, the alarm wasn't just a sound. It was an electric shock. It could blare at any moment, day or night, during a meal or in the middle of sleep. The piercing, chilling woo, woo, woo signaled an incoming attack. The first time I heard a real alarm, I froze, Mr. Robert recounted. My heart pounded. Blood rushed to my head. It was a primal fear, a fear you'd never experienced before. Instantly, every soldier acted on instinct. No orders needed, no thought required. They scrambled out of their tents, running towards the nearest bunker. The pounding of feet on the ground, the urgent shouts of officers, the thud of bunker doors slamming shut. In that chaotic darkness, it was all a scramble for survival. Robert remembered one night. He was fast asleep in his tent. The alarm suddenly blared. He jolted awake, hitting his head on the tent frame. In an instant, he grabbed his steel helmet, his M16 rifle, and rushed outside. The base was plunged into darkness, with only the faint light from spotlights on the watchtowers. He heard a hum from the distance, the sound of incoming rockets. That hum, it grew louder and louder, Mr. Roberts said, his voice as if replaying the sound. You knew it was coming. You didn't know where it would land. That feeling was even more terrifying than the explosion. He dove into a nearby bunker, crowding with other soldiers. The space was cramped, smelling of dampness and dust. All were silent, holding their breath, waiting. Then the explosions came. Boom, boom, boom! Earth-shattering blasts that shook the ground, sending dust and debris raining down from the bunker ceiling. After each explosion, there was a brief silence, then another blast. The alarm continued to wail incessantly, a constant reminder that the danger wasn't over. Robert curled up, clutching his rifle, and prayed. He prayed for himself, for his comrades, and for his family back at home. After the last explosion faded, there was a strange silence, Mr. Robert recounted. No one spoke. Only the sound of heavy breathing, pounding hearts. Then slowly, everyone started to breathe a sigh of relief. Once again, we had survived. When the alarm finally died down, the officers ordered a damage assessment. Robert and his comrades slowly emerged from the bunker. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. He saw large bomb craters on the ground, ripped tents, and scattered metal debris everywhere. He also saw soldiers trying to find friends or help the wounded. These were the moments when the naked truth of war was most evident. There were no heroes or glorious victories, only chaos, fear, and fragile survival. Yet, It was precisely in these moments that camaraderie was most clearly demonstrated. They helped each other, comforted each other, and shared the burden together. We used to joke about our near-death experiences. Mr. Robert chuckled softly. That's how we coped, turning fear into a joke. That's another truth nobody tells you. After each attack, life on the base returned to its normal rhythm, but with a heightened sense of vigilance. Everyone continued their work, repairing damage, reinforcing fortifications. The generators still rumbled, the radio still crackled, but now those sounds carried a different meaning. They were the sounds of life, of existence, of having survived another unexpected night. And in the following nights, as Robert lay in his tent, he listened to the rumbling of the generators, the static of the radio. These were familiar sounds, the sounds of life inside the wire, a life always on the fragile line between safety and danger. Chapter 3, Memories on Paper. In a place where death lurks every day, and life is so fragile, letters from home aren't just pieces of paper. They're lifelines. They're the breath of the outside world, a reminder of why you're still here. Mr. Robert said, his voice softening, filled with longing. Receiving mail was one of the most anticipated moments in Robert's military life. Whenever a resupply helicopter landed, a special flurry of activity spread throughout the base. Soldiers, with tired eyes, rushed towards the landing pad, jostling to see if their names were on the mail list. The feeling of hearing your name called, that was a joy unmatched. Mr. Robert recounted, it was like a tiny piece of heaven falling right into the heart of hell, and when there was no mail, it was a deep disappointment, as if you were forgotten. Robert often received letters from his mother and from his girlfriend, Susan. His mother usually told simple stories about life in Ohio, about her vegetable garden, about the new neighbor, about how she had made his favorite apple pie. Those letters never mentioned the war, never asked him about the horrors he was experiencing. She only wrote about the most peaceful things, as if to keep his soul untainted by the harsh reality. Susan wrote about college, about new movies, about her dates with friends. She also wrote about their dreams, about getting married, buying a small house, having children. Those innocent, hopeful words often made Robert feel a strange detachment. He knew that the world she lived in was completely different from his. We often had to filter information when writing home, Mr. Robert said, a sad smile. You couldn't talk about the smell of blood, about the screams, about what you had seen. You only told good things, happy stories, so they wouldn't worry. That was another burden of the war. Robert's reply letters were often brief and cautious. He wrote about the weather, about new friends, about his daily tasks on base. He avoided mentioning danger, fear, or death. He tried to create an image of a healthy, optimistic soldier doing well. It was a loving lie, another sacrifice a soldier had to make. Photos from home were Robert's most precious keepsakes. He always kept a picture of his mother and Susan's in his worn leather wallet. Whenever he felt lonely or despairing, he would take them out and gaze at them. His mother's smiles, Susan's eyes, were reminders of another world, a world he was fighting to return to. There's another truth no one tells you, Mr. Robert said, that letters from home could be a cure, but also a double-edged sword. They brought hope, but also amplified homesickness, loneliness, and the feeling of being cut off from normal life. Sometimes Robert received letters from friends who had served earlier. They talked about life in America, how they had reintegrated, or the difficulties they faced. Those letters brought a little comfort, a bit of shared experience, but also raised worries about the future, memories on paper, hopes and dreams encapsulated in thin envelopes became an indispensable part of Robert's life. They were reminders of why he was still there, why he had to keep surviving. When night fell, Robert often sat in his tent, rereading old letters. The dim flashlight illuminated the familiar handwriting. He felt a strange peace, a connection to the world outside the wire. The generators hummed, the radio crackled, and insects chirped. But in that moment, they seemed distant. Only the words, the memories, and the longing on paper whispered to him in the dark. Chapter 4. Daily Tasks and Unwritten Lessons. Military life wasn't just about big battles, but about repetitive daily tasks, jobs not found in textbooks, yet they taught you profound lessons about patience, trust, and the value of simple things, Mr. Roberts said, his voice steady, as if describing a long list. As a perimeter defense soldier, Robert's work primarily took place within the base. It was a series of seemingly mundane tasks, but they were crucial for maintaining the safety of the entire base. Digging trenches and filling sandbags, those were our two most basic jobs, Mr. Robert recounted. You wouldn't believe how much sand and dirt it takes to build a base. Thousands of sandbags, each weighing dozens of pounds. We dug, filled, stacked, day after day. The scorching sun, sweat pouring, dust covering everything. Robert's hands were calloused, aching from the friction of the rough sandbags. But he learned a lesson. Every sandbag placed correctly was an extra layer of protection for his comrades, for himself. The monotony of the work was replaced by a sense of responsibility. Maintaining fences was also an important task. Robert and his comrades often walked along the barbed wire fences, checking each section, repairing damaged areas, and removing obstacles. The snip-snip of wire cutters, the clanging of metal, and the whistle of wind through the fences created characteristic sounds. You learned to see the fence not just as barbed wire, Mr. Roberts said. It was a boundary between safety and danger, between our world and the world outside. Night watch was an essential part, hours spent standing on a wooden watchtower, eyes fixed on the darkness, the chill of the night, the chirping of insects, and the terrifying silence. That was when Robert's mind could wander far, to home, to dreams, or simply try to stay awake. He learned to rely on other senses, listening for strange noises, smelling distant smoke, feeling the change in the air. Waiting, that's a skill, Mr. Robert reflected. You wait for something to happen, but you don't know what it is or when. It's a mental battle with your own fear. Michael also wrote about other logistical tasks. Cleaning latrines, makeshift dug holes, constantly smelling foliage. Cleaning the mess hall, where leftover food and flies were always uninvited guests. Transporting supplies, trucks carrying food, ammunition, mail, and sometimes luxuries like Coca-Cola or beer. In these daily tasks, Robert and his comrades also frequently interacted with local Vietnamese working on the base. Women doing laundry for hire, men cleaning, children selling candy. These interactions often occurred in silence or with simple gestures. He learned that despite language and cultural barriers, respect could still be shown through small acts. There was an old woman named Ba. She used to wash our clothes, Mr. Robert recounted. She didn't speak English, I didn't speak Vietnamese, but she always had a gentle smile, and our clothes were always miraculously clean. That was a lesson in kindness, in finding common ground amidst differences. These unwritten lessons, these survival skills in a harsh environment, and the quiet relationships with comrades and local people shaped Robert in a profound way. He learned patience, endurance, and the ability to find joy in the simplest things. When night fell, Robert often lay in his tent, his body tired, but his mind alert. He listened to the rumbling generators, the static of the radio, and the wind whistling through the tent flaps. He knew that life inside the wire wasn't glamorous or heroic, but it was the truth of war, a truth built with sweat, dust, and daily resilience. And in his diary, he recorded it all, not to glorify, but never to forget, to remember that war wasn't just about gunshots, but also the scrape of shovels against earth, the thud of sandbags, and the whisper of unwritten lessons. Chapter 5. Camaraderie in the dark. In a world filled with chaos and death, camaraderie is a fortress. It's built from shared fears, shared laughter, and silent understanding. That's a truth about war that no one tells you until you experience it yourself, Mr. Robert said, his voice warm, full of emotion, as if remembering his brothers in arms. Robert quickly realized that even though life on base seemed monotonous, that very monotony fostered deep relationships. They'd lived together, worked together, and faced danger together. Camaraderie wasn't a choice, it was a necessity for survival. You couldn't hide anything in a cramped canvas tent, Mr. Robert chuckled softly. Everyone knew your dreams, your fears, your habits. Everything was transparent. And that transparency created trust. There was Jim, a tall white man from Texas, who always carried a worn deck of cards and told funny stories about his farm. Jim was a joker, but when the alarm sounded, he was always the first to rush out, regardless of the danger. There was Miguel, a Puerto Rican from New York, who always listened to Latin music on his old radio and dreamed of lively dances. Miguel was quiet, but he was always willing to listen to anyone who needed an ear. They often gathered in the evenings after dinner in their tents. The dim flashlight illuminated their tired faces. They played cards, smoked, and told stories. Not stories of battles, but stories of home, of girls, of dreams. These were the moments when they could just be themselves, not soldiers. You learned to read people just by a look, Mr. Robert said. A tired glance, a forced smile, a gentle pat on the shoulder. You knew who was okay, who needed help, even if they didn't say it. Robert remembered one night he and Jim were on watch in the tower. The alarm had long since silenced, but the tension still lingered in the air. Jim, usually a prankster, was strangely quiet that night. Robert looked at him, knowing something was wrong. "What's up, Jim?" Robert asked softly. Jim looked out at the dense darkness beyond the wire. "I just miss home so much, Robert. Miss the smell of my mom's baking. Miss the sound of the dog barking." Robert said nothing. He just patted Jim's shoulder gently. He understood that feeling. Every one of them understood. In that moment, silence became a language. It was empathy, the shared burden of homesickness, loneliness, and fear. That was a truth about camaraderie. Sometimes you don't need to say a word. Just the presence of another is enough. We often hid our fear with humor, Mr. Robert said. Dark jokes about death, about survival. That's how we coped. Turning terrible things into something that could be laughed at, even if it was a strained laugh. Robert also wrote about the times they faced death together. The alarm blared, they rushed into bunkers, earth-shattering explosions, dust and dirt falling. They clung to each other, praying silently. And when it was over, they would look at each other, breathe a sigh of relief, and share a weary smile. These were the moments where camaraderie was tested and strengthened. He remembered the times they shared small gifts from home, a chocolate bar, a pack of cigarettes, or a letter. Those small items, carrying the scent of home, became priceless treasures, passed around like prized possessions. They were proof that even though they were in a distant place, surrounded by war, they still had loved ones waiting for them to return. Camaraderie is a fire, Mr. Roberts said. It's ignited by challenges and nurtured by trust, by understanding. It's what keeps you from freezing in the loneliness of war. Those relationships, those friendships forged in darkness and danger, became an indispensable part of Robert's life. These were the truths about camaraderie that no one ever tells you about the Vietnam War. They were invisible scars, yet they ran deeper than any physical wound, shaping how he viewed the world and people later in life. When night fell, Robert often sat in his tent, closing his eyes. He listened to the rumbling generator, the static of the radio, and the faint laughter of comrades from the neighboring tent. These were familiar sounds, the sounds of life inside the wire, a life always on the fragile line between safety and danger. Chapter 6, The Return Journey and the Silent Gate. Then one day, you hear your name called, not for patrol, not for night watch, but to go home. It's a strange feeling, a mix of overwhelming joy and a vague fear of what awaits you ahead, Mr. Robert said, his voice deep and warm, like an echo from a closed gate. Robert's final days in Vietnam passed in a tense wait. He had counted down every hour, every minute, until his name appeared on the list of those authorized to fly home. Each day, he put a big X on the small calendar that he had taped inside his personal locker. He had survived. He was going home. The feeling of not knowing if you'd truly make it home until the plane took off, that was a lingering fear, Mr. Robert recounted. You had seen too many unexpected things happen, so you didn't dare believe until the very last moment. The day of his flight finally arrived. Robert said goodbye to his remaining comrades. They didn't say many words, just pats on the shoulder, tight hugs, and knowing glances. They knew that even though they were going on different paths, they would forever be a part of each other by what they had shared, by what they had endured together. As the C-130 transport plane took off, its engines roaring, tearing through the humid airport air, Robert looked down at Vietnam one last time. The dark green jungle, the winding rivers, and the deep scars of war etched into the land. He knew he would never forget this place, the place that had changed his life forever. He felt a strange emptiness. A part of him remained there forever. On the long flight home, Robert sat silently, looking out the window. He didn't talk much. He watched the clouds drift by. watched the sunlight stream into the plain cabin. He felt an overwhelming fatigue wash over him, a fatigue not just physical, but mental. He wondered, could he ever reintegrate? Could he ever find his old self again? "They don't tell you about the loneliness of coming home," Mr. Roberts said, a hint of sorrow in his voice. "You're welcomed, embraced, but you feel like an outsider. No one truly understands what you've been through." When the plane landed at O'Hare International Airport, Chicago, Robert felt a sense of disorientation. Everything seemed too bright, too noisy, too fast. The dazzling advertisements, the blare of loudspeakers, the laughter and chatter of the crowd, people rushed by, smiling and talking, seemingly unaware of what he and thousands of other soldiers had been through. He didn't see understanding in their eyes, only curiosity or indifference. Robert returned home to suburban Chicago. His family welcomed him with open arms. His mother hugged him tightly, tears welling in her eyes. His father patted his shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. Susan ran to hug him, her smile radiant. But Robert felt an invisible wall separating him from them. He couldn't share what he had seen, heard, done. He couldn't talk about the smell of death, about the screams, about the profound fear. Robert's diary, which had accompanied him throughout the war, was carefully put away in a separate box, along with his Zippo lighter and family photo. He didn't open it anymore. It was a mirror reflecting truths he couldn't put into words. He knew that those truths, those hidden stories, would forever be a part of him. The return home wasn't a glorious victory, Mr. Roberts said, but a new beginning, a beginning full of challenges, full of silence, and full of unanswered questions. That's the truth about coming home that no one ever tells you. Michael tried to reintegrate into daily life. He married Susan, had children. He found a stable job. He lived a simple life, trying to forget the past. But those memories never completely disappeared. They lurked in dreams, in quiet moments, and in sudden sounds. Police sirens, fire truck sirens, or the explosion of fireworks in the sky could all trigger haunting images of blaring alarms, of rockets, of terrifying nights inside the wire. The smell of diesel from buses, the damp earth after rain, or the scent of gunpowder from a fireworks display could all transport him back to Vietnam. Chapter 7, Remnants of War and the Healing Path. War doesn't end when you leave the battlefield. It continues to live inside you, in your dreams, in your fears, in how you see the world. And the path to healing is a long journey, a silent war, but full of hope, Mr. Roberts said, his voice filled with deep contemplation. In the early years after the war, Robert struggled with what was later called post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, though the term wasn't widely known then. He frequently had nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding, and a feeling of profound fear. He felt like he was still in Vietnam, still hearing the alarms, still running to the bunker. "I often felt like I was still inside the wire," Mr. Robert recounted. "Everyone around me lived a normal life, but I didn't. I was always alert, always worried about things they couldn't see." He became distant from everyone, including Susan and his family. He couldn't share what he had experienced. Every time he tried to tell, he saw uncomprehending glances, polite nods, or empty platitudes. He felt like an outsider, a ghost, living among the living. Robert's work life was also difficult. He struggled to focus, easily irritable. Loud noises, crowds, or unexpected situations could make him jumpy and uncomfortable. He changed jobs many times, unable to find a place where he truly felt he belonged. Susan, his wife, was the most patient. She loved him, tried to understand him, but also felt helpless. She often saw him sitting alone, gazing into the distance with empty eyes. She tried to get him to see a doctor, but Robert always refused. He didn't want to talk to anyone about it. He thought he had to face it alone. "I buried my diary and steel helmet deep in the closet," Mr. Robert had said. "I thought if I didn't see them, didn't think about them, those memories would disappear. But they didn't. They lived inside me, gnawing away bit by bit." Years passed. Robert became an older man. He saw his fellow veterans struggling with similar issues. Some turned to alcohol, to drugs. Some retreated into solitude. He knew he couldn't continue like this anymore. He needed to find a path. One day, while cleaning out an old storage room, he accidentally found the box containing his diary and steel helmet. He sat down, slowly opening the lid. Dust covered them, but the memories were intact. He took out the diary, slowly opening it. He reread his own handwritten words from his youth. He read about his fears, about his losses, about his unanswered questions. He read about Johnson, Mike, Billy, about Jim, Miguel. He read about night watches, about the alarm, about the explosions. Tears began to fall, not from sadness, but from release. Those pains, buried for too long, were now set free. "I realized that," Mr. Robert said, his voice warm. "I couldn't run from the past. I had to face it, accept it, and find a way to live with it." That diary, it wasn't just a notebook. It was a part of me, a part of my story. It was proof of what I had been through. That was a turning point. Robert began seeking out veteran support groups. For the first time, he sat in a room with men and women who bore similar scars. They came from different wars, but they all had one thing in common. They had experienced things no one else could understand. He began to talk, sharing his stories, the things he had kept locked away for decades. For the first time in years, he felt heard, understood, accepted. He was no longer alone. Robert also found a new joy, gardening. He spent hours in his garden, tending to plants, working the soil. Whenever it rained, he would sit on his porch, listening to the rain fall on the tin roof, on the leaves of the trees. The rain was still steady, but now it was no longer the frantic drumming of war, but a peaceful melody, a whisper of nature, a sound of life and rebirth. He felt a deep connection to the land, to nature, as a way to find balance in his soul. The remnants of war, the invisible scars, never completely disappeared, but Robert had learned to live with them. He had learned to turn pain into strength, the past into lessons, and silence into the voice of hope. Chapter 8, The Legacy of Memory and a Promise to Future Generations. A soldier's life doesn't end when the gunfire ceases. It continues in the memories they carry, in the stories they tell, and in the legacy they leave for future generations. That's how we keep the flame of truth and resilience from ever fading, Mr. Robert said, his voice now solemn and proud like a teacher imparting valuable lessons. Robert Miller, at 80 years old, was a grandfather, a father, and a silent teacher. His old diary, no longer a hidden secret, was now a cherished keepsake, often placed on his living room table where everyone could see it. Sometimes his grandchildren, with wide, curious eyes, would ask about it, and Robert would smile, beginning to tell his stories. "I don't tell them about the most terrible things," Mr. Robert explained. "I tell them about camaraderie, about resilience, about the lessons I learned about life, about the value of peace, and about cherishing every moment." Robert told his grandchildren about the smell of the jungle after rain, about the incessant chirping of cicadas, about the distant thud of helicopters. He told them about Jim with his funny stories, about Miguel with his Latin melodies, and about the other soldiers, each with their own personality, their own destiny. He told them about the letters from home, about hopes and longing. He told them about the moments he saw the local people, ordinary individuals caught in a war that wasn't theirs. Robert's stories weren't just memories. They were vivid lessons in history, in courage, and in the complexity of war. They were how he passed on his legacy to the next generation, a legacy not of hatred, but of understanding and compassion. "One thing I always tell my grandchildren," Mr. Robert said, "is that war is never the answer, and peace is not a given. It needs to be built, to be preserved, day by day, little by little." Robert also became an unofficial mentor to young veterans. Soldiers returning from Iraq, Afghanistan with similar scars sought him out. He listened to them, sharing his experiences with hidden pain, with sleepless nights, with the difficulty of reintegration. He didn't offer empty advice, but simply listened and said, "I understand. You're not alone." He often invited them to his garden, where he told them how gardening had helped him find peace. He showed them how to work the soil, how to plant seeds, how to listen to the whispers of nature. And in that garden, amidst vibrant flowers and birdsong, the young soldiers found a bit of stillness in their souls, a fragile glimmer of hope. Meetings with other veterans, his friends, who had shared those difficult years, remained a valuable part of Robert's life. They didn't talk much about the war, but they understood each other through every glance, every gesture. They shared silent pains, unspoken memories, and even rare smiles. Their camaraderie was still there, strong as the sandbags that had protected them. "Camaraderie is an invisible thread," Mr. Robert said. "It connects us, no matter where we are, no matter how much time passes. It's a promise that you will never be forgotten." On beautiful evenings, Robert often sat on his porch, watching his grandchildren play in the garden. The moon shone brightly, and the wind rustled through the trees. He took out his steel helmet, placing it in his palm. He took out his Zippo lighter, his fingers tracing the engraved words, "Vietnam, 1960s." He clutched it tightly. It was still cold, still hard, but now it no longer carried fear or sorrow. It was a symbol of life, of resilience, and of a life fully lived with all its truths. "Life is a diary," Mr. Robert said, his voice deep and warm. And every day you live is a new page. What matters isn't what you write, but how you live, how you love, how you overcome difficulties, and how you pass on your lessons to the next generation. Robert closed his eyes, a gentle smile on his lips. The rain on the roof, the night insects, the laughter of his grandchildren, and the whispers from the old diary, all blended together, creating a peaceful melody, lulling him to sleep. He knew that no matter how many challenges life brought, he would continue to live, continue to fight, and continue to seek peace day by day. But Robert gently stroked his white hair, his eyes still calm and deep. Placing his hand on the old book, he closed his eyes, a gentle smile on his lips, as if he himself was drifting into memories, peaceful dreams enveloped by the sound of rain and healed recollections. Wishing you a very deep sleep and peaceful dreams.